Okay, so this is a question I was recently asked by the lovely Laura, and one of the queries she had when she's been doing the Carolyn Pyjamas sew along is about the shoulder seam. So this is the front shoulder seam here, across here. This is the neckline, and this is the back shoulder seam, and this is the back neckline. I've only cut very small sections to demonstrate what we are talking about here. So if you were to line these up and to line up the raw edges here, what happens is the front is longer than the back, and that creates some issues. So you don't know whether you're supposed to line that up so you get a nice curve there, or what happens at the armhole edge here. But actually what you should be lining up on this pattern is your stitch line. So I've marked the stitch line, so that's 1.5 centimetres on this pattern, or 5/8 of an inch, and I've marked it on both sides of the fabric. I've marked these fabric pieces so that you know right side is the bit that says right side, funnily enough. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put right sides together, and if we line up the raw edges, we've got this little bit sticking out at the edge. But actually that is fine, because when you look at where you line up your stitch line, that will mean that the neckline will match up perfectly here at this end and give you a nice curve. Now I'm just going to sew that, and then I'm going to show you how that actually looks in reality once you've stitched that in place. The query did arise, however, because we were talking about French seams. So if you were doing this for French seams, you'd still want to line up, when you're doing your first pass of your French seam, you still want to line up this stitch line so that that matches, and your raw edges, don't worry about them, just so long as you're matching your seam line, your sewing line here and here, this is fine. This little triangle that's protruding over the edge doesn't matter. Okay, so I've sewn this with a seam here, and then we would press that seam like so, and if you press your seam allowance open, what you will get is a nice smooth curve to that neckline. This pattern, if I was making this pattern, I would have trimmed off that bit on the paper if I'd drafted the pattern, but that is each designer's own little quirks. So you want a nice smooth curve to your neckline, whereas, and that would also give you a nice smooth curve to your armhole. You're not worrying about what's happening on the actual raw edge, you're matching up your stitch line. So I hope that clarifies things for you, Laura, and anyone else who has had this issue. But you should always match your stitch line, not the raw edges.